Okay, welcome to the New Jersey Council for the Humanities latest In the Weeds. Today we are discussing designing hybrid programs. If you are new to the New Jersey Council for the Humanities or to In the Weeds, welcome. Thrilled to have you here. The New Jersey Council for the Humanities is a state level partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And our mission is to support and advocate for the public humanities right here in New Jersey. This program is part of a program we run called In the Weeds. In the Weeds is a capacity and skill building series for organizations that do humanities work. There's a lot of different materials that we have covered through our In the Weeds program. You can find it on our website at njhumanities.org/program/in the weeds. It's in the program section of the website. There you can see recordings of past programs. You can make suggestions for future programs. So if there's a topic that is particularly relevant to your work, we'd love to hear about it. And of course, you can keep abreast of what programs are coming in the future. This is the first, Designing Hybrid Programs is the first in a two-part series. The next part is happening next week. That is July 21st at this time. So same time, same place, right here on Zoom, for our second part, which is about executing hybrid programs. So we're going to be talking a lot about program development in this session, and then focusing more on the technical and logistical aspects of doing hybrid programs in our next session. So today, the session is facilitated by me. I'm Gigi Naglak, the Director of Programs at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, and I'm joined by some fantastic colleagues from around the state who have great experience doing hybrid programs themselves, as well as virtual and in-person programs. We're going to be getting into a lot of that through our discussion. I'm joined today by Sylvia Filippini Fantoni, who is the Deputy Director of Learning and Engagement at the Newark Museum of Art in Newark. Great to have you, Sylvia.
Hi.
I'm also joined by two colleagues from the Cherry Hill Public Library. Claire Thomas is an adult services librarian.
Hello.
And, hi. And Beth Kakowski is a youth services supervisor at Cherry Hill Public Library. So I think without further ado, we'll get started on our discussion. So I've invited each of our participants today, our panelists today, to introduce a little bit of how they have worked in hybrid programs over the last couple of years at each of their institutions. So Claire, we'll get started with you.
All right. Hi. So when COVID hit, everything went insane and nobody knew what was happening. We were all furloughed. All the full-time librarians were furloughed half-time. We're all at home. And then we're all stressing, what are we doing? What are we doing about work? And because it's really hard to be a librarian from home. It's like pretty much impossible. And so we started really slowly. I was actually looking back at our spreadsheets of program attendance from 2020, just to be like, what did we do? It was so crazy. I didn't even remember. We started off pretty slowly with planning smaller online programs, which a lot of that included our ESOL learning programs. They all went online, and that was really the beginning, kind of. And the smaller things we did were to dip our toes in were we had staff read poems for National Poetry Month. We had staff read short stories for a different month. And then we had to start planning for adult summer reading, which I'm in charge of. And we had to we were starting to do regular programs, and we're like, what are we doing? So many of us had to figure out how to use technology, presenters and staff. We had to learn how to, like, what kind of programs do you need help with? Like, what if you're presenting yourself, you always need, I learned you need somebody else to help you kind of facilitate the room. Do you have the right technology at home? Our library was able to get some grant money and bought Chromebooks so staff could actually present from home, but that was an obstacle we had to deal with a lot too. Then patrons, we had to figure out how to, like, communicate with patrons about how to use the internet and Zoom and everything. And it was so much work. It was so much work. It was hard. It was really hard. But we all at least Cherry Hill, we bonded together and kind of in the adult services department really worked hard to make to make things happen. So our program numbers were pretty good. And then they, like, for the beginning, and it started dwindling down as I think people got sick of being online. But I was really proud of all the work that we did. It's kind of swinging together and making plans and failing sometimes. You know, that happens occasionally. But Beth definitely can speak a little bit more about how the youth services department was handling, because they had to deal with things completely differently, for sure. So I'll let Beth describe her experience.
Hello. So very similar to what Claire was talking about, we were freaking out. We did a lot of YouTube story times where we had no idea if people were really engaging, which was frustrating. Finally, we opened back up the building and we started doing outdoor programming. And that worked really well for children's and teen programming. Then as it started to get colder, we were like, well, let's try hybrid programming. So for the people who are in person, they could be in person, and the people who still were not comfortable attending an in-person program, they could do it from home. So one of the things that we purchased when we did it was the new room, which we don't even know if that's really how you pronounce it, but that's what we call it. And it looks like this. And it's a little camera, and I think it's like 180 camera and 180 speaker. And we started doing some of our programming with that. There's a much fancier version called the Owl that is like a 360 camera and speaker. We had team programming that we started to do. We did team book club, was very successful doing it virtually. A hybrid version. All of these programs started out exclusively virtually. And then we started adding in as we realized, oh, people want to be in the building. And, you know, especially the teens were extremely brave right from the get-go. They were like, we don't care. We want to be in the building. And we did some really cool programs, tarot card reading and crystals. Some of them we actually had people come pick up the materials. Like for tarot cards, we made tarot decks. I'm sure that's some kind of copyright violation, but we made tarot decks from the Rider-Waite tarot thing, and we like printed them off on cardstock, and then people came and picked them up. So they didn't want to come into the program in person. Little bags of crystals for the crystal program. We had music performances, and one of our teen services librarian, Jasmine, is extremely talented musically, and we found that performances were very successful with a hybrid model, because people could watch from home, they could watch from within the building, and if it was an audience and not as much participation, that really worked well. For kids, we tried a bunch of different things. We had a social justice book club, which kind of failed for other reasons, not necessarily for the hybrid reasons. It's tough to get kids to really that age to talk about social justice. We had Babysitters Club, the Babysitters Club book club, and that was very popular and actually did work well in a hybrid model. And we did things like You Can't Catch Me, I'm the Gingerbread Man, where people would pick up supplies ahead of time, which was like cookie decorating. And the people who wanted to do it here heard the gingerbread story, did the cookie decorating. The people at home heard the story using the new room and did their cookie decorating at home. So we tried a whole bunch of different things, and some of it was successful, some of it did not work at all. So I think we're probably going to talk about that as we go through this session.
Oh, I just wanted to add for our library, it seems like book clubs did really well as hybrid things, like really well. And then a lot of other things, not so much.
That's interesting because, yeah, a lot of it depends on the content, right? Really, that it makes the difference. Anyway, I must admit, I'm very impressed, Claire and Beth, with what you guys have been doing. I think that the museum has been just dipping its toes into the hybridity, and we've what we've seen so far hasn't convinced us, but it's because the nature of the program that we have that are being more successful are parties, and that doesn't quite translate so well in hybrid mode. But I'll take a step back and kind of talk a little bit about how we got to this point, which is a very similar narrative to the one you described. We shut our door down in about 4 months after I started here in March of 2020. The museum did not have any experience before with hybrid, with virtual program at all. Like I think they did maybe one thing as an experiment at one point with a grant, but that was the extent of it. And then within 2 weeks, we really had to sort of turn it around. First with the idea that it would only be a month or two, and then it sort of became our life because the museum was closed for a year and a half. So it really became the only way, virtuality became the only way that we engaged people with people. And it was an interesting journey. A journey that we've already shared with Gigi and with some of the audience, but a journey that started, we had no clue I had some experience with virtual programs before at the institution I work in before, but mostly for schools. And so we just tried. The first program we did was a disaster. We got Zoom bombed. It was hell, and we were like trying to kind of fix things in the background, and we just like, oh my God, what did we get ourselves into? But we stuck with it, and we actually turned it around. We were in the year and a half that we were closed, we were able to engage 15,000 people through our virtual program. And that's only Zoom. And then some programs were only virtual, like we're only on Instagram, for instance. Most of our Zoom programs were broadcasted through social media channels like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we reached another 130,000 people through the social media channels, right? So we were, surprised by our own success and how quickly we were able to pivot. It required a little bit of a learning curve that had to be super fast, but we kind of caught up with it. And we were really, after the first 3 months, we started looking at the nature of the program we were offering and how we needed to change the nature of the programs themselves, because at the beginning we were kind of in the mode of like, more panels and lectures and discussion where the public was very passive. And we realized that resulted in a much older population and less diverse population that we were used to in person. And we saw what can we do to change our programs virtually so that we can be more interactive and participatory and maybe engage a younger audiences. And then we tried everything. We developed 2 games, a murder mystery and an escape room. We developed a competition called Art Olympics, where museums are facing each other. It's really fun. We did museum crawls. We did an art roast. Like we did a lot of like more fun and playful stuff. And we did see a change in the audience and creating more opportunity for participation through the virtual programs. But then, we started opening the museum again. And so we said, okay, so how can we take what we've learned in the last year and a half and sort of, continue it in some ways, because the virtuality certainly allowed us to reach a wider audience. So we were, connecting with people in England, in India, in Japan, in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. But for some reason, we were kind of connecting at a different level. And so we were like, okay, we're continuing some virtual programs, and we can talk later about which one we decided to continue with. But then we said, well, let's see if we can add a level of virtuality to the physical programs. And we did a few experiments. We are treating it as an experiment because our biggest focus is, as an institution, is to bring attendance back to pre-pandemic numbers. So the focus as an institution and the priority is the physical events. But we say, are there any events that it makes sense to add a sort of virtual element to it? And we figured out that it was more the kind of the panels, the talks, these kind of events, right? And so we did a few. I would say that probably we can count them on 1.5 hands. And we tried different models. So the majority of these programs were physically happening at the museum in the auditorium, and we would broadcast them on either YouTube or Facebook or even Zoom. So we did 3 different things like that with mixed results. And because they were experiment, we didn't advertise them. So there was necessarily a lot of attendance because it was more like an experiment, but that was one model. The other model, which was the most complicated model that we did, was for a sort of a conference that we had where we had the panelists were all on Zoom because they were all across the United States. But we had a group of women that it was for a women's conference, and they met here for a reception at the museum, and they sat in the auditorium and watched the program on screen, and there were a few people connecting on Zoom. So that was kind of a slightly different model. And then we were recently prepping for a third model, which is we have a Black Film Festival right now, and we were imagining that some of the speakers might not be able to come physically, and then we would connect with them in the auditorium from Zoom. And but that didn't quite happen because everybody is coming in person. But we had an accident one day we were supposed to have a staff meeting and a speaker coming in. Their flight was canceled. And so we had to arrange within 50 minutes for them to join the staff meeting virtually. And so we kind of tested out a few things in those 15 minutes. And we had some horrible results, but hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that later. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of what we've done, which is a different scale than what you guys have done, but it's more like in the experimentation and sort of feeling what it makes sense and what doesn't, and is this a model that we want to invest a lot of money and time in moving forward.
That is really, really helpful orientation, I think, for the rest of us who are thinking about this. I think something that's immediately coming out, and every single one of you has talked about this, Claire, Beth, and Sylvia, is a spirit of experimentation. And I think that's really critical in thinking about hybrid programs. So I wanted to see now that this is not brand new, and we're not in quite as much of a place of frantic grasping at straws. If you feel you're maintaining that feeling of experimentation, how that is serving you, or if it's not, or if you've moved toward regularizing things in different ways. I'm curious if any of you have thoughts about that.
I mean, I definitely do. I guess my feeling from our department was that it was never really experimentation. It was mostly like flying by the seat of our pants and seeing what worked. Like there was not really a lot of planning necessarily that went into planning hybrid programs. It was sort of like, we get the directive from our director, and she'd be like, you're going to do hybrid programs now. And you're just like, oh, what does that even mean? I don't know what that means. Like what kind of staffing that means, what kind of technology, how do we advertise this and have people register? And do you have two separate registrations, one on our website, one on Zoom? Like, what do you do? It gets really, really complicated really fast. So I know, at least for myself, I felt overwhelmed a lot of the time when I was trying to plan hybrid programs. It just felt like something was going to go horribly wrong at any point. I mean, most of the time it didn't, and really anything that went wrong was pretty minor, but it was still, it was a lot. It was like double. It was like running two programs at the same time for two different audiences. It was tricky.
Right. I think I've been hearing that from a lot of colleagues, Claire, and I think that's foundational when we're thinking about hybrid programs, is that it is running two programs at the same time for two different audiences. And I think.
And you learn it the hard way. You learned it the hard way because the first time you don't know that that's what it needs to be. And then you're like, oh, okay.
Exactly. So you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen, folks of all genders. Running a hybrid program is running two programs simultaneously for two different audiences. I think that sort of like accepting that in your brain, your heart and soul is key to even beginning to take on hybrid program models. And then of course, there's a lot of challenges with that, but one of the biggest challenges is staffing.
That's what I was going to say, because
more, please, Beth.
Traditionally, one librarian does a program, whether it's a story time or a book club. It's usually one librarian on staff who is running it. And we needed two people because we needed somebody in the room to run whatever the program was. Let's say it was the book club. And then we needed somebody on the other end, in the monitoring chat, muting people, specialist kids who didn't mute themselves, and just kind of like answering questions, dealing with tech problems. So we had to, and we don't have a lot of extra staff. We don't have any extra staff to do that. So we would have to schedule people specifically, like shift schedules down or whatever, to make sure that we had 2 people for each program, each hybrid program.
Right.
And even when the program doesn't require an interaction on the other end, for instance, when the program is physical at the museum and it's broadcasted on social media, or like it's not on Zoom, so there can be more dialogue. There are problems as well of like, like for one program, particularly, we had a Bisa Butler talk at the museum and it was sold out. So we sort of, people will follow online. It was free. We didn't charge for the online version of it, but we thought it was going to be popular. And then we didn't realize, but for first 15 minutes of the broadcast, there was no audio that went through. So a lot of people probably just gave up. This is because we had already a person running that and a person running the main event, but there were so many people coming in and out. So it wasn't like a fixed camera in front, and that sort of required 3 people, not 2. And so nobody realized that there was no sound going through the broadcast for about 15 minutes, which basically killed the program online, because, we repurposed it. We sort of edited afterwards and reposted it. But if people had connected, they would have just said, okay, that's it, bye.
That's such a good point. I forget if I said this. I should very much clarify. You're going to need at least 2 people to run these, at least 2. And I think one of the things that's coming out to me also is this technical end of this. Now, I do want to say we're going to get into more detail about the technical parts of this in the second part of the series, which is next week, and the video will be available soon as well. But I'm curious how you all handled that. I feel like I got a crash course in how to use Zoom. And yet, 2 years into this pandemic, as somebody who is helps organizations, supports organizations programming, I actually feel like my technical knowledge is still way behind where it needs to be. So I'm curious how you and your institutions handled some of that necessity to figure out how to be an audio engineer and video editor and programmer, all of those kinds of things. How have you managed that in your institutions? Has that fallen on individuals? How has it helped you?
We had a couple staff members on the adult services side who were really good at editing videos in YouTube. So they were really good at adding introductions and slides at the end. And she basically took it upon herself to do that. We would upload the videos to YouTube, make them private. She would edit them and then make them public. Yeah, that part was hard. I was not one of those people who was good at editing, at all. Terrible at it. I was lucky too when the pandemic started. I already had a webcam. I already had a headset. Because one of my kids had dreams of becoming a YouTuber when they were young, which didn't materialize. But I already had a lot of the equipment. That was a big stumbling block for people, because you can't really hold your phone in front of your. I mean, you can, but it's annoying to hold your phone in front of your face and stare at your phone, and you're trying to do a presentation, and you can't really. It's really hard to facilitate in Zoom when you're using a phone. You need a big screen. It's hard, and it was a lot of stumbling blocks with technology. And then patrons, I know on our side, in our department, we help people with technology all day long. So I feel like our department already knows how to explain how to do things to people pretty easily with I can't connect to Zoom. And we are oh yeah, I know exactly what's going on here. This is the problem everyone has. Or, we help people with that stuff virtually all the time anyway, over the phone. So that part wasn't as bad, but I could see how it could get complicated for other organizations if you're not used to having to teach people how to do things every single day.
Right, that's a great point.
For youth services, we all just had to learn it. And some of us are better at things than others. One of our staff members was really good at editing YouTube videos. But for the hybrid programming, we had to all learn how to use this thing, which was not, I mean, it's really, like Claire said, it wasn't that complicated to learn. It's just then not only is it learning the technology, it's learning, well, where can people still see me? What's like, how far can I be away from the speaker? People can still hear me. But learning Zoom, I think most of us picked it up pretty fast. It was just kind of I think less of the technology, more of the structure of how things work. And it's like, for example, we have hybrid story time, and we had the new room set up on a table, and inevitably after like the intros, we always have families come in kind of late and stuff to get small children up, all together and in the car, and somebody would inevitably sit right in front of the camera. And we would, the person doing the story time did story time mode, so we didn't really notice it. And we would be like on the back side being like, oh, no, move. But yeah, so I mean, it's not always possible with children's programming to, well, any programming really, to stop in the middle and be like, hold on, somebody's in front of the camera. For our clientele, our patronage, it's a lot of younger people because they have with young children, and they seemed to take to the technology really, really well. So we didn't have as many questions as probably Claire and the adult services staff had with for patrons how to use it.
That's really interesting. Existing familiarity with these kinds of resources that comes from young people is really helpful. Beth, I just had a follow-up about that. When you are doing your programs, if you're doing a hybrid program, like one of your hybrid story times, for example, do you have somebody watching that as it's going, as if they are watching it from away?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we sometimes with the staffing issues, we'd have to have the person who is watching the hybrid version is also sitting the public service desk. So sometimes we're helping people and we're not watching all the time. But funny story, we had a parent in one of our hybrid story times, and the child was really, really acting out, and the librarian was like, if he's just having a terrible, terrible day, feel free to take him out, see if he can calm down, and then bring him back in. Well, I heard from the parent later, like, oh, this is terrible. How could I have been, they're children, they're supposed to, he was not running around and acting out. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry to tell you that I was watching on the hybrid version, and he was running around and screaming and distracting the other children. So that is our policy to just ask, encourage the parent to take the child out. We never be like, get out. But so I had to be like, well, actually, I saw what happened. And then it was awkward.
It's a little awkward. I was seeing Claire and Sylvia, I was seeing you nodding when I asked that question. You similar kinds of experiences? Trying to watch your live streams or failing to watch your live streams, as Sylvia, nobody knew that there was no sound for 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there was actually another instance that was interesting for us, because generally we have been working in the realm of free programming, right? So if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. There's a certain level of tolerance on the other side as well. But we had this women conference, and the people had paid for that experience. So we did hire a company because I wanted to make sure that everything was smooth. And with the understanding that they would run both, the sort of as I said, there were people physically sitting in the auditorium watching the Zoom panelists in the auditorium, and then there were people in Zoom watching the same thing, but the guy was only focused on the auditorium. And then I sort of had that inkling, that something that I better, I was doing the event physically, but I sort of decided to go up and get my computer and sort of see what was going on Zoom. And all of a sudden I'm seeing on Zoom that I can see the panelists that were scheduled later coming in, while in this physical space, you in the auditorium projection, you didn't see them. And so I kind of run to him and it says, why are people on Zoom seeing different things from what people are seeing in the auditorium? And I thought you were managing all of this. And he was like, no, I wasn't. I was only told to do this. And that's when you're in the middle of a thing, you realize that you have a different understanding of what the service provider was going to do to help you. So I kind of like had to sit down and do that, like right next to him and show him like, so, you know, so that he on his control, he had a system to control both, and then he would avoid that. But unfortunately, there were a few snafu that people on Zoom saw that people on site didn't. And so that was kind of an interesting, yeah, as I said, that you learn, it's baptism by fire. You'll learn it in the hard way. You know, thank God nobody complained, because I mean, it was just, you know, a few small things that didn't really affect the quality of what the people were saying in the conversation. But, you know, clearly goes back to the idea that you have to constantly monitor what's happening in both environments.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There were times when I would be at the reference desk and I was tasked with like making sure nobody was sitting in the waiting room in a Zoom program. But then I'm get distracted because I need to help somebody at a computer or answer a question. And then I go back and there's like 7 people in the waiting room. I have no idea how long they've been there. I don't know how much they missed. I feel terrible. I don't know what to do. I mean, like, I can't do all the things. You know, you just have to do the best you can. I think I found that people were pretty generous with their attitudes about stuff like that, because they understood like you can't. It's just too much. Like you can't be perfect all the time with hybrid programs. It's impossible.
You're anticipating my next question, Claire, actually, is I'm curious about your audience responses. And I actually want to spend a little time talking about audiences, because this is something that all of you, I think, are already making clear, and I want to make even more explicit, is that matching the kind of program to the audience is really, really key. And then another thing then there's all the other things that are going to take into consideration. What is your staff capability? What is your, what external resources do you need, and so on and so forth? What's the medium that's going to make the most sense? So I'd love for you all to talk about that a little bit. Just to get us started, Beth, you mentioned that your kids came in with a great understanding of the technology, so they were easy adopters of the technology, but you also said they were the ones who were like, no, get me in the building. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, the teens especially really wanted to be in the building. But also when we just were doing virtual programming and not hybrid or in person yet, they were the ones who they knew from being in school online that you wait your turn, that you nobody's talking at the same time, that you mute when you're not speaking. And so that was, I think that was a little bit easier. They knew how to act. And the children also, to a degree, knew from school how to act in a virtual program. Of course, they just love the chat, and it's a lot of chat back and forth. And for example, the Babysitters Club book club, a lot of the chat was just like ragging on each other's babysitter. Like, your favorite Stacy, but I really like Marianne, and she's better for this reason. And it was just like trash talking babysitters in the chat, which was kind of funny.
That's just ridiculous, Beth, because everybody knows that Claudia is the best babysitter in the Babysitters Club.
I know. I was not allowed to give my input, but so yeah, for the kids, if it was one big discussion, or the book club where everybody takes the turn, or a performance, lecture, that kind of thing, like for teens, here's how you do tarot. We're going to talk about this card now. We're going to talk about this card now. That worked because everybody knew when to listen, when we would say, then kind of take their turns and raise their hand. But for an example, I'm just going to use this only because the person who runs the Adult Needlework Guild she works in my department, and I know that she was having a lot of trouble with hybrid because it's a sit and stitch. It's and people are having their own separate conversations all around the table, and then you put the new room on, and you've got 1 or 2 people in there. they can't hear what people are individually talking about. If they try and say something, nobody hears them. So that was an example of a program that just did not work. But fortunately, they could move it outside when the weather got better, and people said, then how lovely is it to work on your needlework outside in the good weather. But yeah, so that's one that definitely would never probably go back to any kind of hybrid model, because it just doesn't work.
I will say that it worked really well virtually, because I actually took that
Yes.
over while my colleague Kristen, who normally runs it, was furloughed, and I'm a knitter, so I was asked to take it over. And online it worked great.
Yes.
In person works
So-
great. Hybrid
so
does not
you're-
work.
Hybrid
I was
does
going
not
to
work.
say, just to clarify, yeah, you're talking about it worked great in just a virtual space or just an in-person space. It was the hybrid specifically that was
Yeah, because it was conversations. It wasn't people taking turns speaking. It was just kind of hanging out, and I think that probably people just couldn't. People, I think online especially, were getting frustrated. Nobody can hear me. I'm trying to ask what you're making. So I would say definitely one conversation, one lecture, one performance works the best. In our experience, worked the best for hybrid programming.
interesting.
That's all we've experimented with it as well. Sorry, Claire, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all we have experimented with, really. As I said, the virtuality for didn't work so well for kids program at the museum. It's more about art making, and we were trying to give them a list of materials in advance and stuff like that, but it just didn't kind of work. So we're focusing on getting them physically back. So we for virtual programs, I think that so in thinking about like the future, I think that what we are seeing, I don't know if you have the same kind of feeling, but I'm actually seeing a bigger participation in virtual talks, in attendance in virtual talks than in physical talks. So that's the one thing that post-pandemic, we've started realizing that people are not, like, they got used to be able to listen to interesting conversation remotely, and the idea of going somewhere for a talk, it's not worth. I'm not sure if they think it's worth it. I'm saying that we've done a few in-person talk since we reopened, and our attendance has been very, very little. And even though people are tired of virtuality and everything, a few talk that we've done still virtually, they've done much better in terms of attendance that our in-person talk. So to us, the lesson is the way forward for talks, particularly is really virtuality with a possible hybrid component it's virtuality with a sort of shared on social media, Zoom and social media, rather than sort of do an in-person talk with sort of a hybrid component or a virtual component. The only exception to that might be conferences where there's a kind of a networking opportunity in person, but there are people that are not able to come, and so you can grab those virtually, but there's also a kind of an importance of that kind of getting together and getting the sort of networking side of it. So I do feel that for us, that is the model that we'll probably pursue. Not that we do that many conferences, but conference-like experiences that we will pursue more for hybridity, and then the rest will kind of stick with virtual for talks and panels and discussion, because we feel we can get more participation that way.
Yeah, the nice thing about doing things virtually still sometimes is your speaker can be from anywhere, and you don't have to you don't have to pay for travel, and you don't have to, and sometimes the honorarium won't be as much because it's virtual, so they'll cut the price down. I recently was talking to a person to do genealogy program, and their in-person price was very, very expensive. Their hybrid price was significantly less expensive, but unfortunately our director wants us to do only in-person programs right now. So yeah, I found that for us with adults, there were a lot more issues with technology and people just not understanding what to do and how to use it. or they'd leave themselves unmuted and you'd have to constantly monitor that and mute people again. And there's like sort of like the screen, like people leave their cameras on, but they're like clearly lying in bed. like what are you doing? Lying in bed with your camera on, okay?
We had a nudity issue one time.
We
Once.
didn't have
Once.
any of that, but yeah, luckily. But I've read things about that on like
Very-
Ask a Manager and stuff. Yeah.
Very brief. Very brief.
Yeah, but brief is enough, you know, like just it's enough. So there was always a lot of technology issues with like adults. So really that was important to have somebody on like the tech side and like sort of monitoring the chat to be like, because sometimes patrons will chat like, I can't hear anything, but they were in the Zoom, so you had to explain to them how to like check the sound on their speakers. And or sometimes and I had this experience, I was doing a presentation, this was in the summer of 2020 on, it's like armchair travel, fairy tale castles, because the theme for summer reading was like fairy tales. And I had linked out to a YouTube video, and I did not know on Zoom, there's a setting, you have to set it to let your audience hear your audio from your computer. I did not know that. And luckily somebody in the audience did, and they let me know. But I wasn't totally monitoring the chat all the time because I was the only one running the program. So that was an example of, that was like the day I learned, like, yeah, we need 2 people for every program. This is impossible. This is impossible to do alone. But yeah, there were a lot more issues with adults and not understanding technology than I guess with kids, for sure.
So you've already sort of started taking us there, but as we think about rounding out our discussion, I want to talk about future planning at each of your institutions. It sounds like in both of your institutions, having people in your physical space is a higher priority. So I'm curious what, if you want to talk at all about why or how those decisions are made, where the priority is coming from, how you're thinking about it, and then what you see for the future of hybridity. Is that a word? Could be a word. The future of hybridity in your programs, if at all. Or do you think you're moving? It sounds like in a lot of cases you're looking to move toward making more deliberate decisions about what's virtual and what's in person. So I throw that out to the group.
Like Claire said, our director really wants us to move into only it can be hybrid, but mostly in-person programming, nothing that's completely virtual. With children, we were finding out, especially in the story times and in the programs for young children, that the parents, what we didn't realize before was that parents were making connections in those programs too. There were programs for children and babies, but the parents were actually making friendships and getting to see each other, and it was a social thing for them too. So when we went virtual, we lost that and didn't even realize that was even happening before, until somebody was like, well, you know what, I just don't see anybody anymore, because our virtual programming started to drop off and off and off. And even the hybrid programming, it was mostly in person and just a few people on the virtual side. So we were once again lucky enough that we have an outdoor space. We have a very large backyard behind the library, and we borrowed this gigantic tent from the township that allows us to have outdoor programming, which got us around the virtual programming for the summer of 2020, even the summer of 2021. Where a lot of our good nice weather programs could happen. But again, in the colder months, people just were not coming to the virtual programming. I think that, I mean, like I said, the teens wanted to be in person. They were going nuts online, just going to school online and whatever. They just wanted so badly to have some connection. And I think that that's why they were able to come. With some of the kids programs, if it wasn't like a baby program or toddler story time, if it was kind of an elementary age, a lot of them did want to come in person, but with the vaccines, they were not being available for the younger ages. There was a roadblock there. And also, who's driving them? Babysitters Club worked well because that age group, they can't, obviously, if it was at a time of day, I think it was 4 o'clock, where parents might not be able to drive their kids to the library. So we had a much heavier virtual attendance for that program, and only like 1 or 2 kids came in person when we moved it to hybrid from exclusively virtual. So for our future, we really are still, I mean, anything could happen with, especially with the way the pandemic is, you know, it's anyone's guess at this point, going back and forth. And who knows, as we're going to go back into colder months, what's going to happen. So, but for right now, we are really focusing more on just trying to keep things in person. We have no mask mandate at the library right now. That changes, that ebbs and flows with the numbers and the percentages of COVID. But for now, yeah, we're trying to keep things mostly in person, with some of it having a hybrid component.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to jump in on that question about the future?
Yeah, yes, I think it's a huge discussion for us, of course, but as Beth said, certain audience did not respond well to the virtuality. Teens, number one, we have a very extensive 3-year teens program here at the museum, and it's really based on interaction. We pay them if they're here, and that did not work remotely at all. As I said, we had difficulty engaging families. I mean, we did programs, we engage a number of family, but like family is one of the bread and butter of what we offer, and that didn't translate to the virtuality. Our audience became older, and actually older, so strangely enough, older and less diverse when we looked at our online virtual program attendance versus physical attendance, and that was, you know, reverting a trend that we had really fought to change before the pandemic. And as the city becomes younger and even more diverse, you know, so that's why we cannot, like, you know, you kind of have to understand that, you know, it's a great model and it allows you to reach different people. It allows you to do things that you couldn't possibly afford in person, but it cannot be the only solution. And for us, we're a museum, and it's really about coming to see the art. The point of it is that you want to come physically to see the art, right? You can talk about the art online, you can play around the art online, but you know, if you're looking for that experience and that connection with art, that sort of has to happen in person. And so, and we have there's also pragmatic aspects. You know, there are a lot of our revenues that are driven by attendance, and you know, online, the model that we chose, we did well. We raised, like, in the 2 years, you know, we're still raising. When we do virtual program, is generally free with a few exceptions, but we ask for donation, and we raise a decent amount of money. But ultimately, you know, we need people to come here, buy things from our shop, buy things from the cafe, you know, get a deeper level of engagement with the institution, and being able to take them up that ladder that sort of engages them as members and as future donors, as future museum professional, that makes them go to a family program and then come to our camps, and then become a part of our Explorers teen program, and then become an intern, and then become a museum staff. So like that pipeline is lost. And so because of that, the physicality is important. It's also, we have grants to, you know, change galleries, you know, rehang things. And, you know, even though we have a 360 tours of everything that you can look online, it's not the same thing. So, and it's also a political choice. You know, I have to be honest with you, downtown here in Newark has been severely hit by the pandemic, because it's a space where not many people live, but it's mostly businesses, right? We have Audible, we have Prudential, we have Panasonic, we have PSC&G, we have Mars Wrigley. And if, you know, they're not physically, these people are not physically here, and the economy of downtown as a suffer. And I think the mayor really wants to bring people back to downtown. He had invested a lot of money into, you know, making downtown a sort of a lively business spot. And a lot of these companies are choosing to go virtual only or remote work, and it's impacting the economy here. And we as a museum that receive contribution from the city, we need to be part of helping the regenerations of downtown in the post-pandemic world. And so we need people to physically come to the museum. It's our duty. We are building a sort of cultural district here downtown, and we have to sort of we have to be part of that machine that brings people here.
This is so interesting, Sylvia. I think this perspective, and Beth and Claire, you've alluded to this as well in slightly different ways. All of us are talking about the opportunities that we have in virtual spaces to engage the world, right? To engage them as speakers, to engage them, but ultimately we are all feeling a great responsibility to our home communities as well. And I think that's an interesting moment that we're in right now. Claire, I didn't mention.
Yeah, I was going to say what Sylvia said about being a museum and you're supposed to be open for the public. That's what libraries are. Each community has a library and that library serves that community. And when you're doing things online and you're serving people from Alabama or, England or China or, like somewhere else in New Jersey that, they aren't taxpayers for our library, like, then how is that benefiting our community? That's really what the work we're doing is. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to benefit the people who live here. We're always happy to share with other people, but like really our first priority is the people who live in our community.
I was looking at statistics yesterday. During the pandemic, the number of people from Newark that engaged with us was 5%, and now we are at 25%. So you see the huge jump that there was just by bringing the physicality back into the story.
That's incredible. That was actually going to be the next question I wanted to ask you, is how you are assessing your audience's needs and who's in the spaces, who's in different spaces. Do you have, it sounds like, I'll mention Sylvia because you just mentioned specific numbers. It sounds like you're doing pretty robust looks at who's attending what and where they're from. I'm curious if you want to tell us any more about that, and Claire or Beth from Cherry Hill Public Library, if you have any information on this as well, how you're assessing who's in your spaces, all of those spaces.
We do surveys. So of course we literally count everybody in all the spaces. If it's a physical Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But so that's the first thing is counting. The second thing is really the demographics and satisfaction and their interests and needs. That's through surveys. So we do send surveys to people that just come and visit the museum, and we send surveys to people that come from a program, whether it's at the museum, offsite, or virtual. So we try to kind of find the demographics that way, and we do see interesting differences. And as I said, in person, younger, more diverse; virtually, older and less diverse. So, and then family is pretty much all in person.
I wish I had some great metric to say that this is what we use, but yes, it really is just attendance numbers. As it started just getting smaller and smaller with the virtual programming and like 2 people watching a program. The other thing that we find especially with families, is that we get such a great response when people don't have to register for a program. And for a virtual program, you have to register, at least for the children's programs, because we didn't want to just put the thing out there and get Zoom bombed, especially not for, the toddlers. And with programs that we do in the summer, we have the whole backyard. We don't require registration, just come, if it's not raining, just show up. And parents really like not having to plan that far in advance. Plus, we have a limited amount of space in our program room that especially with COVID, we don't want people packed in. And we had to limit the numbers, and then people were like, well, forget it. It's just too frustrating to try and get into the 12 spots we had for this one story time. So I think that is something that has just proven our point about that in-person programming is just the way to go for children, because they were just showing up. I mean, we went from, if it was like a virtual program, even a hybrid program, we'd go from maybe 10 families to 75 outside. So it's there's no comparison. And that's basically how we've decided if it being a perfect situation, there's not high numbers, we can do it outside, the weather's good, we are going to stick to in person as much as possible for the kids. I think that teens would go back to virtual if we had to, and hybrid. But I think that for the young ones, they really just want to be in person, and the families, the parents want to be in person.
Yeah, I think we're going to be in person. The only way I could see it going, having anything virtual for adults, is maybe if we had an author coming who lived far away, but we would probably have it in our conference center on the screen and then have everybody come and watch it. So, yeah, because we found with our programs for adults that it was really hit or miss. It was like we'd either have 50 people show up or 2. And it was sort of like, didn't make a whole lot of sense, like, because some authors, 50 people would come, some authors it would be 5. I did one virtual program on the medical aid in dying law that New Jersey has, and I had 50 people come. I don't know why, like, who knows, like, why? And they were, I think most of them were a little bit older. And then we had a couple, I hosted or ran a couple programs with 2 different horror authors, and those were mostly younger folks, but a lot of them were not from the state or not from Cherry Hill. They were from different states. They just happened to hear about it from social media, or they were friends of the author, or, whatever. So we never know. And it's just, we were so used to, before the pandemic, packing our house like full, like 160 people consistently for programs, like in like bigger programs consistently. They like fill up with a waiting list. And then it's been really kind of sad to be like, yeah, 50's great now, because we're so used to having more people. So I prefer to do things just in person, have it be either virtual or in person. I did not enjoy doing hybrid programs at all. And I understand why we had to do them for a while, but it was just really hard. And I'm glad we're not doing them anymore.
Claire, are you finding that with your in-person adult programs, are your numbers starting to come back to where they were in pre-pandemic levels, or still
Yes. So at least I know for the programs I'm running, then this is an outdoor event next week. We have somebody coming and doing a trivia night for adults, and that's almost full. And Michael he's presenting at our library in August, and it's rescheduled. We had like a tornado crazy warning the day he was supposed to come in May, so we rescheduled. But in May we had like 90 people registered for in-person indoors. So yeah, which is really, really, really good. So we're hoping for the similar numbers for this one as well.
That's awesome.
For us, we're going through an interesting process. I think our audience has changed. Our in-person audience has changed. I think that we are generally a fairly diverse audience before the pandemic. Lots of the family side of it is staying the same, but the people that are coming are, we had traditionally a group of older audiences. Generally, most of our audience was over 45 and majority Caucasian, but with a decent representation of BIPOC communities. And I am seeing much younger audience. That audience is not coming back to the museum, that was the core of our audience, our members, and people that would come at the Black Film Festival, which is happening right now, and it would be traditionally older Black ladies, and we are seeing a younger audience attending all of our programs. I mean, we have changed the nature of our program to focus more on events that would attract this audience. We've built partnership during the pandemic that would bring a new audience in, but interestingly enough, we're not seeing that older audience that we always counted on and always come back. So that's kind of an interesting. So we're suffering a little bit on the fact that we are building completely a new audience, with the exception of families. And of course, our numbers are not where they needed to be pre-pandemic. They are when it comes to programming. They are not when it comes to general attendance, and on school. School is like a whole different conversation. But that we have less control over, because of course it's the reality of the school still adjusting to coming back. But so it's kind of a new audience, a lot of new first-time visitors, and a more younger people. And again, it's a deliberate attempt on our part to bring these audiences. But what's surprising is that the older audience is not coming back. So we're trying to figure out why. And it was surprising. It was an audience that we didn't have to make too much of an effort to get to the museum before, but they are not coming back. So we have to figure, it's just like we're looking at data every day, and we're kind of learning these things every day. So we don't have a strategy yet. We don't have a but yeah, it's a new audience. So building a new audience takes time. And so of course we're not back at pre-pandemic numbers, but it's an interesting phenomenon. And
Really
definitely more programming than general visiting the museum. Like I think our programming are like most of our audience is driven here by 75% of our audience comes for programming, either school or physical, and only 25% comes to just see an exhibition or be in the galleries and see the museum. So that's kind of it was a trend before, but it's even more evident now.
Yeah, that is a huge amount. That's a huge number. So as we wrap up, and I promise this is going to be my last question, I want to get sort of like a gut feeling from each of you about what you're thinking about in this moment, right? What you're thinking about as you see the difficulties we've been through, the opportunities that we have ahead of us, what you've learned, what you still want to learn. What is the thing that's motivating you as you're thinking about engaging your communities in program? I'm going to say in programming, right? We're talking about hybrid programs, but I'm going to say in programming. What is your thinking ahead in the short term? What is getting you jazzed? Who wants to start?
I'll just say again, what we've learned is that once again, the children really like to be in person. We also know that if things take a turn, especially as the weather gets colder, and we had Omicron last winter, that we can move to it. We can pivot really quickly, and we have the technology to do it. So it's not so scary anymore. We know we need 2 people to do a hybrid program. We know how to set up the room so that everybody can see in a virtual program or a hybrid program. So I think that's for the future. It just doesn't seem, I mean, of course, this pandemic is scary in general, but it feels like what Claire was saying earlier, it just feels like, I've been saying to my colleagues, this feels like this is the first time, like it feels like a normal summer for us. Summer in a public library is bananas. We just have so much more traffic. We have the summer reading program. People are in constantly, and with the program attendance and the attendance up and the youth services floor, it feels like a normal pre-pandemic summer. So I'm not sure if any of that answered the question you just asked, but basically, I just for the future, of course, we're probably going to stay with as much in person as we can, but there's no fear with having to go back to hybrid and or virtual if we really had to.
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah, it was really fun this summer because we typically have a summer reading kickoff event, which we call Trucks, which is a food truck and touch a truck event. I'm in charge of the food trucks and the DJ, and Beth's department is in charge of the touch a trucks. And Beth this year was the person who organized all that. And it was that day we had the numbers of people coming to that event were just as high as they were. We hadn't had it in 2 years. It was just so nice to see so many people coming out. And I was like, it feels like summer, like we're kicking off summer reading. And I don't think if we had it last year, it would have been that way. So that part's been really nice. I've been really excited about as we go more in person. So I used to do a veterans oral history project, which was difficult because interviewing veterans can be traumatic for them and for the person interviewing. And but we've decided before the pandemic to move it more into a local oral history project with interviews. So I haven't been able to even think about that for a long time, and I'm looking forward to in the fall starting to do more of that again, and getting started with scheduling interviews. That's going to be really fun to be able to do that in person. But again, what's cool now is that I know exactly what I need to do. If somebody's like, I can't come in person because I'm immunocompromised, can I do an online interview with you in Zoom? I'll be like, yeah, that's fine. We can do that. Like, it's not complicated. It's not scary. Like what Beth said, it's not scary anymore. Is it inconvenient? Is it difficult sometimes to organize? Yeah, but it's not scary.
Like Beth and Claire, if we were to, if we were to be hit by another wave, we are ready to, we are ready. We know what works, what doesn't. We are ready. But I'm having this feeling, and that's what I wanted to ask you the same. We are currently in the middle of another wave. I don't know if we realize it, but we are, because this week I have nobody for the Black like it's like my staff, half of the staff is gone. Most of the speaker have called in that they can come. We are in the middle of a wave, and people just don't care. I don't know. I just feel like we had a pride ball last week with like 430 people attached to each other watching like people like having fun, and like nobody was wearing masks. Like I just have the feeling, I don't know if we have another wave unless it's like a complete like reverting back to lockdown. If people are really going to just stop in coming and interacting and wanting to be outside and hang out with other people, because we as a staff have to still wear masks, but none of our visitors does. I mean, I got COVID at an event. We had an art gala, and me and a few of our colleagues got COVID there, but you know what? And I'm still going to all these other things. So I don't know. I just wonder where people are mentally over, unless it's getting to a point where we were back to the March of 2020 situation of lockdown. I wonder whether people are going to sort of like, well, this is now part of our lives. If it kind of continues more or less how it is, I wonder whether we'll need to go there. Maybe I'm being optimistic, or maybe I'm being disrespectful towards people's life. I don't know, but this is the feeling that I have from people. If you do something they're interested in and they want to do, and it allows them to engage and interact and be together, they are craving for that. After 2 years of pandemic, they are craving for that human contact. And I don't know, it needs to be a really hit, like big wave that will stop them, because I feel that that's what people are craving for right now. And in terms of thinking about programming in general, for us, it really, in the last 2 years, we rebuilt the way we connect with the community. By sort of opening up our institutions to them virtually and physically, by creating new partnership, by really the reason why we have this new audience in is because we've developed new partnership, and these people have brought their people in. And so that, to me, that's the way to go, and continue to go out, develop new partnership, open the museum up to them, and to do their own programs at your institution. And you're the kind of host in a way, or the facilitator. And that's what we are trying to do and continue. And we want to continue doing, whether it's virtually or physically or in a hybrid mode. That's just our MO.
I just wanted to comment on something that Sylvia said about, people just don't care. Well, we did, once Omicron hit in January, like really the numbers were just off the charts. We did start closing down nights again. Our programs went back to virtual, and people didn't want to do it. We did not have the attendance that we had for because we went from all virtual to kind of hybrid to we're open, and then back to never mind, we're back to virtual, and people weren't really attending. But we did it as like, I think the difficulty for any building is are we being responsible? Like, are we being irresponsible for having a program that would bring a lot of people together, or is the responsible thing to make it virtual, knowing no one's going to come? So I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge. As like, I agree, the BA5 or whatever we're in right now is people, it's like people are getting sick left and right, and it's like, oh yeah, we really should be wearing masks. but nobody's wearing masks. It's just going to be a challenge to figure out what's helping our patrons, and is it still helping us, and vice versa.
Yeah, we don't have a mask mandate in our building right now, and staff don't have to wear them either. I don't wear one. I mean, and I'm vaccinated and boosted. I got COVID anyway, even though in January. I just think the symptoms are so mild now that most people are just like, I feel like I have allergies, with a lot of these weaker strains, but that doesn't mean it's not dangerous for some people to be around it. We have plenty of staff who do still wear masks and plenty of patrons who still wear masks to things, but I don't think people are going to want to go back to virtual either. Like, I think now it's nice to have an option if it's hybrid. I think people like the option of the hybrid thing, but it's just really untenable or unsustainable as a staff. Like, people like to have the option of be like, oh, I really wanted to go, but now I'm tired after running errands and taking care of my kids and working all day, and maybe I'll just watch it online. I think some people like to have that option, but it's just not realistic for us as a staff, for our staff anyway, to like maintain that at all.
I think that's the thing I'm hearing from all of you. It's the thing we're hearing from other program partners and grantees that we work with at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, is that the space we're in right now is being able to make better informed decisions about this. Understanding the technology better, understanding our audiences better, that is all something we have, like when we think about, mostly the pandemic has been, a living hell, but there are some really great things that have come out of it. And I think all of you are reflecting a lot of those same questions, a better understanding of our opportunities that we have and where our technical capabilities are not actually going to serve our audiences. So I'm really grateful for all of this discussion today, particularly for your candor. I think it's amazing to think about how organizations in totally opposite ends of the state, one being a big fancy museum. That's what you describe yourself as, right, Sylvia? Big fancy museum. Oh, definitely. And our local public library. These are two of my favorite institutions in New Jersey. I'm lucky enough to get to spend time there in each of your institutions on a regular basis. So our next in the weeds, we're continuing the discussion about hybrid programs and getting into some of those logistical and technical questions. What resources are out there if you do want to do hybrid programs, or you want to do your virtual programs in new and engaging ways? What are some of the technical ways that you can begin to continue to engage your audiences through those mediums? I encourage you to stay in touch with New Jersey Council for the Humanities. Keep an eye on what we've got coming up. Thank you again to Claire, Beth, and Sylvia for joining us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much.